about it being cold or being, you have a very leisurely dinner out and then you can go back to your hostel. And I think that you want to say something?
While he's just doing this, I'm going to read you some D.H. Lawrence, because I didn't think I had time, but if he's going to have a video, I'm going to read you some D.H. Lawrence. The novel has a future. It's got to take the courage to tackle new propositions without using abstractions. It's got to present us with new, really new feelings, a whole new line of new emotion which will get us out of the emotional rut. Instead of snivelling about what it is and has been or inventing new sensations in the old line, it's got to break a way through like a hole in the wall. I wanted to bring out this idea of breaking through as just an additional metaphor to the ones that Claude had used to organise his program over these days. Right, are we ready?
Are you ready with the sound?
No, you can use the mic.
Mic over there.
There should be a mic. That should be connected.
That's right. Yes. Oh, I can. No, since.
Keep the mic there.
Since yeah, I forgot to show you two very short videos. On the videos. Yeah, since you loved my presentation, I thought maybe I'd come back and have another 30 minutes. Okay. This video shows the importance of teaching English, that the United States State Department is putting a lot of effort and money in teaching English language around the world. So, I hope this works.
Sunshine, Undersecretary for Public Diplomacy and Public Affairs here at the U.S. Department of State. Welcome to the new American English website. We are proud to launch this cutting-edge resource for teachers and learners of English around the world. Anyone can use our materials. They're free. On the new American English site, you will find high-quality materials to download and virtual training tools to keep up with what's new for teachers and students. The powerful search feature lets you find articles and resources to fit your lesson plans, and when you're done, you can easily share your list by email. We are also launching Trace Effects, an innovative new 3D video game. The game is a great classroom addition for teachers and for students looking for extra practice. These are just a few of the great new online resources that we are excited to be able to share with you. We encourage you to take time to check out our new website, americanenglish.state.gov, and share it with your friends and colleagues.
And this is what she was talking about. This is a 3-day free program. You can access this program on freely on net. Thank you very much. You want the mic?
I'm reminded of a poster that we have in our department that Zul just stole, which says, if the product is free, you are the product.
So, they are almost, no, you are going to ask last. If there is nobody else, I'm going to ask you. No, let's wait. Yes, anybody in the back there? Any question? Everybody's tired.
Okay, so my question is to you, because I mean you kept saying that Dixon, she said she is a PhD in philosophy, and she talked about using quantum mechanics, presumably because you want to show the interconnectedness of everything as it appears in our culture. So what you need is decolonized physics. And that decolonized physics which I talked about, which relates to quantum mechanics. It's called the structured time interpretation of quantum mechanics, but I don't want to get into those technicalities. The point is that with this sort of a physics, you have spontaneity. You have some kind of time travel, if you like, some kind of spontaneity, and that involves interconnectedness. Let me just explain. Read.
You had this conversation with Noah yesterday.
No, not the conversation. The Popper's-Pont paradox. There's something called Popper's-Pont paradox that you take normally you throw a stone in a pond.
As the chairman, I'm ruling this out. This is not a question.
No, I'm trying to relate it to ethics.
You are not allowed to have another panel, chance, another lecture, another guys.
Talk about ethics.
You ask a question.
I am making a comment.
Comments and all. Your comment becomes lecture.
To which she will respond.
Please.
You want me to ask about that?
You are giving a comment. You are not asking. You ask.
Decolonize ethics.
Now, let me ask Sean a question.
Can I make one comment?
Please do.
I'm not sure entirely where you're going, but I'm happy to be your student.
Chance, I'll come to ethics. The point is, you talked about the desirability of environment. Now, desirability is not enough. There is so much of a push to create consumers, as he mentioned. There is so much of a push for the capitalist value of consumerism. It's not just at the end, at the other end, at the bottom up end, you are trained to do that, and that is contrary to your idea of sustainability or your idea of preserving the environment. So you can link these two together through the harmony principle that I talked about. There has to be some element of, some element of force behind the ethical principle. Not force as in my laying things down, but force as in force of conviction. And that can only come from a view of the world. It cannot come merely by saying, let us have more concern for the world. Because the people say, why should you have concern? You have to answer that question. The basic.
My comment, which might not encompass all your thinking, number one, I'm not only looking at an ethics that is more analogous to a Māori worldview, it's also some principles that are needed for a world of interdependence, and it's not intended as simply desirable. I'm working with lawyers and judges to bring about laws of public trusteeship as an expression of responsibility. So I'm not seeing this as simply an attitudinal change, but something that we need, this framework of responsibility needs to be brought into law and into a systemic shift.
The point was that if you have this, you cannot have law.
Well, you can never.
Law brings down.
You can never.
Connectedness. If you have this thing going, you have to have judgment. You cannot have one rule. You cannot lay down a perfect rule. as you do for a computer. It's impossible.
No.
That's
Well,
it.
law is not only for regulation, it's also for transformation. But you can never capture everything within law. I fully agree with that. You can't codify attitudes and responsibility in the full ethical
Ideologically
sense.
wrong. Ideologically wrong to have a law. Because that is requires God to use the word with eternal laws. If you have a Ghazali, you have Allah who creates the word continuously with habit, not law.
Can I ask you,
Yes.
I think that the two of you are giving us sort of contradictory positions of the language. He sees the English language as a threat because it's being used by the United States government, which has always been up to no good, for ensuring whatever, cultural influence, etc. But you see language in a totally liberating way, and if you have this version of the language, if you have the game successful, etc., you won't have a D.H. Lawrence in the future. If everybody writes English the way the Americans want you to write English, because then it becomes just a simple mechanical tool, functional tool, which you learn on video games. There's nothing creative anymore. So how would you deal with this?
I would say that I agree with everything that he said, and that the particular modes of American soft power through language are very similar to modes of European and specifically British soft power through language that took place in earlier periods. But in changing the narrative, what we say is people appropriate that language, they adapt that language, and then they make that language their own. And the amazing thing is that during the Cold War, when the American CIA were funding all kinds of activities which they thought were going to kind of push American values, the Congress for Congress for Cultural Freedom, which supported several magazines and different cultural kind of activities. Many of the people who were involved in those activities were unaware of their funding. Were kind of horrified later on, but then once you start studying, say, Encounter, which is a very important British magazine, you look at the content of that magazine. It was in many ways radical, it was in many ways liberal and questioning, and was far from entirely sympathetic to American power. So it's very difficult to me to think that any language is going to embody a partisan set of values. The English language will ultimately be broken apart and will develop amongst its language community in many different ways. And as I say, in terms of literature, the English expression has been completely changed by its collision with different knowledge communities and artistic communities. So I don't think they stand a chance. I think it's I mean, if we want to go back to surgical metaphors, they're introducing a virus into their plan that will actually kind of come back to the host. It will come back. And frankly, within America itself, there is no simple, homogeneous relation to language. It's a very diverse, multicultural environment, and it's a very radically experimental literary and artistic environment. And I think, interestingly, in Malaysia, we've just established our School of English Studies, and the highest recruitment program has been for creative writing. People who are second and sometimes third language Anglophone are wanting to use that language in new and creative ways. So I don't think language is actually, I think there's some very naive soft power policymakers there. They just look foolish to me because language in reality doesn't work like that. I don't know.
How do you respond to it? Because what he is saying is correct, because people do appropriate language.
I agree with most of what he says, but there are two things that we have to distinguish. One is the policy of the governments. And this is not only with the US government, it's British, as you said, it's Russians, Chinese. They're all expressing on their teaching languages with one purpose. And it's not enlightening people to understand the cultures or get knowledge. It's to influence the people through the changing their cultures and teaching them that they have a superior culture except their own. So this is what they're doing. And they are not actually naive. because what they're doing, they have started from 1954, I think, after the Second War. It's United States Information Agency, which was formed after the Second World War. They have done a lot of propagation against Russians in the Cold War era. And one of the major things that they were stressing on it was the English language teaching. And the propaganda that they were doing with the VOA, and the other one is BBG, the broadcasting of the government, and the books that they are producing. It's tremendous number of books that they're producing. And the countries have selected two things. One is changing the alphabets, and it has been done in Malaysia, it has been done in Turkish. They were not successful in Iran, because changing the alphabet is, what they call it, discontinuation of the culture of the people with their past. The Malaysians cannot read their old history or old poems or whatever. And the Turkish is the same thing too. But in Iran, they are telling these people that if you want to learn a language, you have to learn through their culture. And this is the dangerous part of it. But just finishing one. What we are trying to finish, you can take my picture before strangling him. In Iran, actually, we are trying to teach English through our own culture.
One comment on English is that a sentence is made of a subject and an object. So there is a structural guard that is in addition to what you're saying, which completely overrides the interconnected view of a lot of languages.
Yeah, I was going to say that certainly, just to get back to relevance, conceptual relevance changes from language to language, and so English is limited in its conceptual range. It has itself adopted and taken on new concepts that are new words and neologisms. The only other thing I would say about what you said is that, notwithstanding my sympathy with your view on American power, English isn't taught by websites. English is taught by people like us. And the beauty of it is that we see through these websites, and if we come back to the teachers, it's the teachers who make the difference, and as you say, appropriate the language for their own education context, I hope. But as Betsan's point is really key, that certain grammatical and syntactic structures absolutely make it impossible to say certain things that some languages can say. And language is self-translation. The idea that placenta and birth are the same term, that's just invisible in English, and so that's a whole kind of structure and approach to the world. It's just different.
20 minutes time, please. I agree with him. You know, I didn't have enough time. I have about 360 some slides. What you're saying is true. They're not doing it just through the English language. Even the English language, they have different programs that they're doing. And one of them is this website and this. But it's not that. It's teaching through the teachers. Obama has taken one program which is 100,000 students to be traveling to China within a few 20 years or so, and he has taken another program which is 100,000 student exchange with Latin America. And they are saying themselves that through these exchanges, the Americans can learn the Chinese culture and try to transfer their own culture with them. And with the Latin America, the program is worse than that. And they want to bring 200,000 Latin American students to learn American culture and language. There is nothing wrong to learn American culture and language. What do you want? But this is my microphone. It's not if you are working at the university, it doesn't mean that you can influence you cannot take my microphone. And there are tremendous number of programs. I have it in my slide. Tremendous number of programs that is designed to teach the youngsters from other countries to live American way. So this is, I don't like, time is over.
This actually, to come at this from an entirely different perspective, the other work that I do is about transnational education and is about mobility and exchange. And there are huge programs, as you say, about moving students around and ensuring that students share and exchange and experience different cultures. And I think we're getting into a slightly difficult and problematic area if we're saying that isn't, in many ways, a very good thing. Many of the Americans that I've met in Europe have been transformed by their presence in Europe. Similarly here in Malaysia, although you don't see so many Americans here in Malaysia perhaps. But sending Americans to China, I think that's a great idea because they're going to go back home different if they go back home at all.
I would like to add to that because I get a lot of people coming to India.
Please.
From Germany and from Holland, and then after 6 months they don't want to go back. They want to stay there and they want to settle down. But anyway, that's just being fun. I think we should reward Luthu for standing up for the last 10 minutes.
No. Just 1 minute.
Question. Panel, no. Panel.
Come on.
We are having a second.
I'm coming a long way to here to speak.
Lotus. Transformation in the university.
Luthu, go ahead. But I don't. Okay, please.
Okay, I will address the first question to you. Iran has a huge diaspora in America. Diaspora in America. What is its role in the projection of American power this way?
The impact is tremendous again. You have to be careful. Let me just give you one example. It's good to learn in English this phrase. Learn to say no. Okay? Learn to say no. It's a very good thing to teach in our schools, for example, through the English language. But what do they mean by saying learn to say no? They mean to say if your uncle comes and tells you as a kid, come and sit on my lap, you learn and tell them no. Because they're thinking in American culture, when your uncle sits you on his lap, he is thinking about bad things about you. But in our culture, the relation between uncle and the niece, you call it, is very, very close. And it's a family relations. We are not breaking our family's relations. They even teach you, if your father tells you, come and hug me, you learn to say no. But the father is there to hug his son or daughter. So these are the things that you learn. Now, in Iran, don't think about the Iranians in America. That's even worse in Iran. The child, instead of saying mother or mama, is going to say mommy. Okay? Instead of saying pedar, your baba, which has the cultural roots, it says papa, or papi, or father, something like that. It is changing the relation, the way that the child is talking to his parents is changing. And this, over time, will reach to the point that for the families right now, instead of having the good family like the Malaysians do, that I'm really proud of our Malaysian friends, having 3-4 children, they come up only with 1 child. Because they cannot communicate and have... Now, the Iranians which are in the United States, living in the United States, have culturally been really bombarded. And since we're living there, they have got a lot of their habits. And they have a very difficult time coming back to Iran and living with that culture again. It started with, I remember 30 years ago, during the war, when I came back to Iran, you know, everybody was running from Iran when there was a war, but we came back. They finished schools in America and we came back. The first morning, my eldest son, which is around 35 years old now, He woke up and said, "Daddy, I want orange juice." I said, "Forget about it. What do you mean by orange juice? There is no orange juice in your breakfast this morning." Okay? No, it's either cheese or bread. Oh, that was at the time of the war. You know? It was very difficult to find orange. Now you want orange juice? Okay? And then he wanted some other things. Later on, he was 4 years old only. Later on, he really understood and felt a love that my family could give him. He could really feel the love. But over there in America, he was lacking that love. Now, all of these comes through the culture, and I'm not saying, I'm not defying the American culture. It's good for them, I don't care, you know. But I don't want anybody to impose his own culture to me. That's what I mean. Let me live my own life. I want to learn English, I learn English through my culture. If I want to change my writings, I change it. Why should you change my thing? And we have a lot of, in Iran, about 45. The good thing is that I'm old enough that I've seen these things in my country happening. There was a big debate at the time of the previous government to change the writing of our language. And we are rich in poetry. You know, all of you know. We have Mulana, we have Hafiz. And imagine if we had done that at that time. What would happen to our youngsters? They would be completely disconnected with their own culture. So I'm not against English language, I'm not against Russians. I love to learn Deutsch, but I couldn't learn it because it was difficult. I love to learn all the languages because I want to say greetings to people. I want to say that I like them, I love them. I like to learn Malay, but I cannot learn anymore. I can, but it's difficult. I like to learn it, but I don't like somebody pushes me and tells me you have to do this and that and that and that.
The lesson is that you have not answered Gopi's question because he's still standing.
What was the question?
The second question was to Sean. In the UK, there has been this assertion of Welsh nationalism, Scottish nationalism, and of course there's all the Irish nationalism. What is this done to the novel? How is it reflected in that novel? Then the last bit is, how do you account for the resurgence of the Harry Potter genre? What does it say?
I actually have a lecture on Harry Potter if you want me to give it, but we study Harry Potter as a 1990s phenomenon, and it's really interesting in the way that Harry Potter is extraordinarily successful, and I'll come back to the question, because of the way that it utilizes and exploits a whole series of common cultural stories about magic, about transitions from childhood to youth and the accession to maturity and responsibility, and it draws on all kinds of other previous writings of magical stories and Grail legends and quest narratives, and so it's extraordinarily rich in the number of different story codes it employs. So it's no surprise to me in one sense. It's also there's a great British tradition of the boarding school story that it takes on as well. If you think of Tom Jones and all those stories. So it's actually a very clever piece of writing. But to go back.
Before you leave that, I was asking I was coming from Keela's context, how the system digs up old things and then puts them to use. Fairy tales, magic and so on